Hello, my friends. It is I, Rich Filiberto, DM Philly, out here on the internet, your friendly neighborhood podcaster. Very excited to be back with you again for another week of House of the Dragon. Episode 2 of season 2 has been released. It was an incredible hour and change worth of television. Rhaenyra the Cruel. We're going to break it all down over here at Screen and Page. Go follow us in all the places at Screen Page Pod or all the social medias. Go follow me at DM Philly. And of course, my commensurate co-host, the one and only Stormborn herself, LaTonya Starks. I am so excited to have you here today. Where can people find you on the internet?
Find me on Twitter at LK Starks.
Go find her on Twitter at LK Starks. Jump into the Screen and Page Discord. Hit us up with all of your thoughts. LaTonya, we have an incredible episode to talk through this week. I'm very excited to be here with you. What'd you think?
Oh my gosh, this episode was overwhelming in all of the good ways. First of all, it's one of the most beautiful episodes of this show ever.
Stunning cinematography. It really is so beautiful. You know, I mean, there's so much TV out these days, and there's a lot of very beautiful TV, I think, that gets overlooked. But this is just so stunning, and they are so good at nailing their tone and kind of matching that tone that they set up in Game of Thrones over 7 seasons. It brings you right back to Westeros. You have no doubt where you are, and it's stunning. I loved so much of the cinematography. Aemond with the coin, one of those shots, just great. The attention to detail is magnificent.
And a lot of this episode was shot like a horror movie is shot. There are all of these odd angles and shots from above, and then like disorienting shots as well, that really bring you into how everything is starting to descend into chaos in this world.
Oh, for sure. I mean, the weird Dutch angles, a lot of the lighting, they're doing so much stuff, like even filming like behind screens and some of the Allison stuff. They make especially everything in the Red Keep at King's Landing just feel so kind of overwhelming and ominous. And in the fallout of this assassination, I mean, Helena is so fixated on the notion that their home has been invaded, right?
Yeah.
I mean, this is a really kind of big thing. I don't know if you've ever been through an experience like that of like a home robbery, but it impacts and affects people. And I thought so much of those kind of horror elements in the lighting and in the camera angles and the keep really enunciate the shadows and the corridors and the alcoves and how much is unknown of this place, how much danger lurks in the shadows, right?
Yeah, thank God I've never been through an actual like home invasion or someone robbing my place, because I would have to move. You would feel so uneasy. How could you sleep there again and feel safe?
It's really overwhelming. I had the experience when I was a very young kid. My mom was a single parent. I was right around 6 or 7 years old. She was kind of in her mid-30s. We went away for the weekend to visit family, came home, came into the house. Sure enough, a back window had been forced open. Somebody had come in. And it's really difficult to find security and safety in a space like that, let alone poor Helena. I mean, it's a really great moment as Alicent is kind of dealing with the fallout. The whole episode picks up magnificently in the chaos that you're kind of talking about, in the fallout of this assassination. And Alicent kind of confronting Otto. What did you do to my girl? What did you do to my daughter? Because Helena has been so catastrophically impacted by this. How can you ever feel a sense of safety and security in this place? And they double down on it so magnificently with that funeral procession.
Yeah, I feel so bad for Helena. Like, she was making her son's funeral shroud last episode, and we just didn't know it. Like, the fact that they made her a dreamer in the series is interesting for so many reasons, because you have to imagine, similarly to Bran when he first got the like download, it's kind of like, I've heard it described as the internet but no search function,
right?
So like Helena probably doesn't even realize when she's in waking life and when she's dreaming most of the time. And so for her to realize that she's awake and not in a dream, and this has all actually happened and her son is dead, and then for them to use his death for political gain, as so many people do, unfortunately, with the death of young people, even in modern times, it's terrible that she has to go through that. And it's completely identifiable that she would have that panic attack. like kind of slow motion panic that sets in.
It's magnificent. If you're really watching close, if the subtitles are on, you could see she says, I don't want them closer to me, as the wagon gets stuck and the people are all kind of coming in around her. And there's this notion of her as a dreamer, almost being able to feel their emotions kind of overwhelming her in that way, let alone the actual human response, like you're talking about, and this sort of panic attack that she's dealing with there. They did such a good job of really articulating how the children are children, despite these kind of teenagers that have been put in this position. I mean, she's the queen of the realm, but she's also a very young woman in the context of this story, as is Aegon, as is Jason, Bela, and so many of them, right? And it's just a magnificent idea, this notion of how you parse the reality from the fiction and how you break through that. I talk about it a lot because it's so the kind of central backbone of Screen and Page, but the Wheel of Time shares a lot of DNA with Martin's original work, A Song of Ice and Fire, at least in Westeros. They were both kind of published around the same time. The authors are kind of friendly. They share a lot of themes, but there's this through line in the Wheel of Time that the men, when they gain the ability to use magic is very prominent. It's a much more high fantasy world. They start to go insane. And the notion is they hear these voices and they can never parse, are the voices real? Like, they have magic, and are the voices telling them real things, or are they losing their minds? That ability to sort what is reality, what is the dream, it very much feels right there with Helaena. And that internet with no search function feels like a great way to explain it to a modern sensibility. It's just this onslaught of information that, how do you even sort through it? How can you even process?
Yeah, I don't know how you would process it, and not completely knowing, I mean, knowing what is going to happen ahead of time, but like not being able to articulate it to people, or when you do, they just don't listen to you. Also, and then of course, you know, during the funeral procession, which I know we'll talk more about, but she's just had her home invaded, as you said, and there are all these strangers, like people that she doesn't know, who are getting close to her. She doesn't know, like, any one of these people could be an assassin. She has no idea what's happening. So I don't know, just to subject her to so many different things immediately after the death of her child, when she is already not coping well. And Alicent knows this. Alicent points this out and is still complicit with taking her on the funeral march. Like, it's really difficult to watch, but also it's so beautifully shot that, you know, it just draws you in.
Oh yeah. You know, they have the after the episode featurettes at the end, which is so magnificent. It gives us this kind of great bit of meat on the bone for us to chew on and dig into these kind of conversations after the fact. But they were talking about the notion of the danger of causality, and how so much of this episode is kind of Rhaenyra coming to grips with the danger of her own causality, the notion that her own kind of vitriol, this desire for revenge, bring me Aemon Targaryen, has played out in this series of events, that now a child is dead and things have kind of snowballed completely out of control. And that's so much the notion of the entire story. Certainly when you read the book, because of the way it's presented as this kind of third person recounting of the history, it's also kind of objective. There's very little like emotionality behind a lot of the characters that we're getting, that you can really see the consequences of these decisions, and it's generational, so you watch them play out over generations. And this is so much the kind of theme of the episode. We have that magnificent scene of Aemond with the madam as he's down in the brothel, and he's kind of she's telling him, when princes lose their temper, the small folk suffer. And that is such the notion of this entire story in a lot of ways, that these small movements by the ruling class have now set the world into this kind of unfurling chaos. And to that extent, I think it's just played out awesomely through the whole Hightower family. It's very tragic and sad, but the way is that Otto's decisions, they're going to come back to bite him in the end, and we'll unpack that. But the impact on these children, and then those children's impact on the rest of the realm, it really, like, the pieces fit together in a very satisfying way. Right.
Definitely. And the performances are just so stellar.
They're extraordinary. This whole cast is bringing it. Yeah.
Regardless of whether you're team green or team black, you can sit back and enjoy all of the performances that these actors are giving so much. They're just really breathing life into these characters. So much so that people have gotten a little out of control in conflating the actors with the characters.
True.
It doesn't make any sense to me. They're sending all of this hate to, the different actors on the show. Like Fabian, who plays Kristen Cole, has had to disable his comments on Instagram because people hate him so much.
I can believe that. I always forget the name of the actor who played Joffrey, but I know that he notably had a kind of terrible time through his experience in Game of Thrones. I mean, people on the internet not having chill, least surprising story of the week, right? Like, come on, folks, get a grip. Just to circle it back and kind of recenter towards the beginning of the episode a little bit. We open with Aegon just shredding this model, the out of control, mad king, not quite, but as he's destroying literally his father's dream, his family's legacy. Again, the metaphor is just so strong to set the episode up of this young king out of control and the fallout that we're watching all around, the chaos in the keep, the kind of exodus as we're evacuating all of these small folk and moving all the people, and Kristen Cole is all out of sorts and they're trying to kind of figure out where everybody went. It just plays so magnificently. And Tom Glencarry as Aegon here, this kid has really just kicked it up a notch. I think that he's been so exceptional. He was such a kind of easy character to dismiss and to dislike in season 1, and this kid has just really leveled up, I feel like, in his return to season 2. He's bringing it.
Oh yeah, he's doing a really, really great job. And I think that Aegon destroying Viserys' motto is symbolic of two things. One, that Viserys' methods of dealing with things are not going to be followed by his son at all. And two, that peacetime is really well and truly over. Like, he is completely descending into the I want war, this is the only way that we're going to get revenge for what has been done to my son, to my line. And Tom Glencarry's performance is really outstanding, considering that we didn't see very much of him in season 1. That he's, just had this role of being the king kind of thrust upon him. And you think with all of the scheming and plotting that Otto did for however many years since he was born, that he would have trained him at some point,
right?
to take on the duties of the king, brought him to the small council meetings or something. But no, he just figured he's a boy, he'll be fine.
It's really, it's fascinating the way that, the bad parenting we watch conveyed and articulated through it. And we'll talk about it as we get towards the end. But especially, we understand the notion that Viserys didn't give him this kind of formal education to be a ruler, because Viserys thought everything was squared up. Rhaenyra is going to be his heir. It's all well and done. But the idea that Otto, as this kind of grasping power monger, did not kind of go out of his way to educate these children and give them some of the toolkit that Otto has developed over the decades to climb the ladder of chaos, as it were, right? It really is kind of fascinating, and it does belie the narcissism inherent in so many of these individuals. They're all really just driving their own ships, as Courtless Valerian might say, and setting their own course. And they have very little concern for the actual fleet following in their wake, and it's just bad leadership. It's really bad. But this small council scene is tremendous, LT, as Aegon's going wild about his legacy. My son is my legacy. Part of what really gets me with the Tom Glencarry thing, he vacillates between these stages of grief so wonderfully. The rage, the denial, the unacceptance, and then the pain, the absolute pain, as we'll see him crying later. But this scene in the council chamber, as he's kind of going wild, and Ironrod points out, listen, man, there might be somebody else. There might be a viper closer to our bosom. We really should find out the truth. But Adam is going to double down. We should find out the truth, but actually the truth doesn't matter, because the truth is what we say it is. And we can use this to our political advantage. The notion that their son will be more valuable to them than 1,000 knights in this martyrdom role to rally the people around them. And he's got this grand plan for the funeral procession.
Yeah.
It's just such a setup, and a very small moment as Alicent is kind of getting cornered by her son, and he's really confronting her about her kind of compassion for Rhaenyra. Larys steps in. Larys has been kind of standing quietly at the door with his announcement, and he intercedes right at that moment. It felt a little bit to me, I'm curious if you caught the same, like he was specifically choosing that moment to kind of help Alicent defend her from her son, right? And
of course, yeah.
Focus. Okay.
It was like a not too much on my girl moment, like the lengths that Larys and Kristen will go to protect this woman are, I don't know if you can calculate them. So, I mean, Larys knows that the reason that he has any of what he has is because of Alicent.
Mm-hmm.
And he's also obsessed with her as well.
Yeah, he definitely is. So just to ask, do we think that this was Larys's agenda? Did Larys want to be named the Hand when he's whispering in Aegon's ear, and that he ultimately cut off his own foot? That might have been a bad pun despite his face. Did he screw himself here, or do you think he's comfortable as the Master of Whispers and is just glad to see Otto kind of taken out of the picture?
I thought that maybe he wanted to be the Hand, and that's still possibly a long-term goal of his. Mm-hmm. Like he could probably juggle being both the Hand and the Master of Whispers.
Yeah, he could. We've seen it before of the double duty in the small council, right? And he seems pretty confident. He's a very dedicated worker at the least. Larys is an interesting character. Lest we forget, he killed his father and brother so that he could be the lord of his house. And his house, the seat of his house is Harrenhal, which is this very centrally important military location kind of strategically in the realm, right? Harrenhal, we saw a lot in Game of Thrones, but it's centered just kind of northwest of King's Landing. And it's at the center of all of these different regional areas like the Reach and the Riverlands and the kind of Southlands and King's Landing are all centralized around it. So it's a really important military location because it will allow whoever holds it to really rally their forces and kind of control the northern portion of the kingdom to a degree. But I really do like Larys a lot, like his inclusion as a character, but this notion of him whispering in Aegon's ear is not part of the text. And so I was kind of curious whether or not we're supposed to look at this as a victory for him or a missed opportunity,
I mean, how long could Kristen Cole possibly last as Hand of the King? You know what I mean?
Right.
If he's able to get someone who is not as smart as Otto, who to be the Hand, then he just further is able to manipulate that person as well as the king. So I'm sure that it was his plan to basically just throw into doubt Otto's position and then see what happens and how he can capitalize on it. And I definitely think that he could further his own position by having Kristen, the fail upward man. How are you bad at your job and you get promoted? What?
You should ask Benioff and Weiss, maybe. I think it's really interesting. The whole notion. Larys pretty effective as the Master of Whispers, though, because they found blood very fast, LT. So we got blood in the cells. We're going to come down to interrogate him. I love Larys just unfurling the tools, and blood just gives it all up. He's like, all right, let me tell you everything, man. I'll tell you everything.
I don't want to be tortured either. Just kill me. Please. I'll tell you whatever you want to know.
It's a really great moment as Larys is like, oh no, I'm not going to hurt you. I can't swear for his grace, though, as the king comes in. In the book, they talk about the notion that they tortured this guy for 2 weeks straight. And he really dies slowly. This feels like a very distinct, intentional, and concerted change in House of the Dragon. Looking back to Game of Thrones, I mean, I know you talked a lot on Versus back at PSR about the 1-to-1, but there's so much less. I mean, there was a lot of critique offered towards the blood and cheese scene because it is really toned down from the level of gruesomeness that we get in the text. But in this way, it feels like they're muting down the violence, and they're even muting down a lot of like the gratuitous nudity and some of like the torture porn that Game of Thrones got accused of. And I think it's a real net positive. Like, this feels to me like I don't need that. I don't need that. I know that that's Martin's MO when he's writing these things, to make it as kind of gruesome and brutal as possible. But I think that they are getting across the broad strokes in ways that are effective for me.
Yeah, we listened as they murdered a child.
Yeah, it was horrible.
Yeah, some people really do love torture porn.
Yeah,
you know, they really appreciate, like, you know, the Hostels of the world, for example, like those movies, which I have never seen because I am not a fan of people getting tortured.
I've definitely never seen it, and I could deal with a little bit of grim, dark fantasy. I could exist in this space, but there's only so much I think that you need to depict on your hour and 20 minutes. I love this runtime too. The second I saw the runtime, my God, Shelty, it made me so happy.
I was so happy.
There's such confidence to linger in the small moments. I saw it a lot of the feedback over at the old post show recaps Discord and the Screen and Page Discord, people talking about how this really felt like Game of Thrones when it was at its best in the early seasons before they had a Titanic budget, when they really kind of made their best work out of people sitting in rooms talking. It's a very slow, pensive, muted episode, and I think it's the best episode of House of the Dragon so far. I was so hyper engaged, you know.
I love this episode, and I will say that I think that maybe at least based on what we've seen in the behind the scenes, I think that it's possible that some of the reasons behind pulling back on the gore has to do with the fact that there are more women who are involved in making this show.
Hell yeah.
Who can just say, like, we don't need that. We get enough horror out of these moments. I really do think that they seem to have like a huge voice in what is happening behind the scenes.
I think that you are spot on. I mean, so much of this story is about the plight of a woman in a male-dominated world, and how you just have to grin and bear it, right? And like kind of accept it and move forward. And I appreciate the restraint, I think, because Game of Thrones was what it was, and it's magnificent, and it's terrible, and it's all of those things at once.
Yeah.
But I appreciate that they're coming at it with a pointedly different kind of approach, and they're still reaching for these big moments, because I do think they deliver.
Come watch my new variety show, Grin and Bear It.
So Rhaenyra, I mean, we're very green team focused, which I get. I think we're doing a real PR job for them so far this season of like, we got to gloss them up a little bit. There's just part of the other thing I wanted to talk about with you is that a lot of people that I know that are very casual kind of viewers of this show, they're having a really hard time engaging with season 2 because they've not read the books. They're not deep diving YouTube channels. And there's a lot of moving parts here that you got to remember the specifics of. So it can be kind of hard to re-engage, I think, in that way. But there is a notion where people loved Game of Thrones when it was in King's Landing and we were in the small councils and dealing with the politics. And in that way, this show is nothing but that. It's so much the high politics. And there's been a little bit of critique about the lack of the small folk. We're very kind of centraled in the aristocracy, but we get a lot of the small folk this episode in terrific ways, I thought, as we're starting to expand the world. And so much of season 1 is building a foundation of knowledge for us to get to the actual story, which feels like it's kind of starting here, that I'm ready for it to really kick into gear. But some of the small folk, you talked about it, the scene of like Hugh and his wife, and she had to walk 2 miles to get a chicken for the pot, LT, and pay 3 times more. And his son is dying in the bed and they can't get any medicine. But the king promised some relief when, I don't know, maybe eventually, who's to say? This is the blacksmith that we met last episode in the throne room. He's going to be an important character. I won't say more than that, but I love this scene.
I do. I love the scene too. Imagine having to walk that far for a chicken.
Oh my God, right. A live chicken, by the way. This chicken
Yeah.
is not like plucked and cleaned and
It's
ready to go.
not.
It does not have the giblets in a bag inside of it for you.
Yeah. You really do get in this episode just a glimpse into the lives of all of these people that this war is affecting. Like, the Valarians have cut off all the ports, so nothing is getting in really. They're starting to take all of the food for the dragons because the dragons are probably eating more due to the fact that they're flying and patrolling and things like that. So, of course, and it's mentioned in the show by the brothel keeper later that it's the small folk who are going to be the most affected by the decisions of princes and kings. So it's really good to get a glimpse into the home life of Hugh Hammer, which is a great name, uh, and to see what's going on with him and the troubles that he's facing with his silver hair for some reason.
Ooh, silver hair. Should we talk about the hair a little bit? Because we're going to see
Yeah.
the scene later. Aemond at the brothel, which I thought is really beautiful. We didn't get a ton of Aemond Targaryen this episode, but he's so vulnerable in the fetal position. We could
Oh
dig
my
into it more.
gosh.
But
Yeah.
the first shot in the brothel is this dancer with very Daenerys Targaryen-like hair. Hugh, we can note his hair is very blonde. We're going to see a guy later in the scene with the rat catchers all being hung with his very kind of blonde hair. There is this notion of bastardry and lineage, which is so important to Game of Thrones immediately. And we've not really dealt with it a lot yet in House of the Dragon. But the whole notion of the Targaryen silver hair and their very distinctive kind of presentation, and it's something we should be paying attention to, LT.
I think so, yeah, because what do we know about the Targaryens? They can ride dragons.
Indeed, they can.
And there are lots of dragons on Dragonstone that need a rider. So
there are indeed. And as we talked about a bit last time, the show hasn't spent a bunch of time tracking dragons, but if we're keeping count, Team Green like woefully short on the big flying reptiles, right?
Yeah.
Rhaenyra has a dragon, Daemon has a dragon, Jace has a dragon, Baela has a dragon. There's a lot of dragons rocking on Team Black. And the reality is that Team Green is kind of hanging on Sunfire, the King's dragon, Aegon's dragon, and Vagar, who is Aemon's dragon. And that's kind of it. Helena has one in the books, but we haven't even really addressed it fully. And in the text, I'm really curious to see what happens with Helena, because she really does not respond well to everything that has kind of happened here. This is the beginning of the unraveling of the character. So I'm curious if they're going to follow the course of Helena Targaryen from the text, or if we're going to get a character with more agency, with a little bit more fire in her belly coming out of this. Do you have a sense of that?
I'm concerned about her.
Me too.
Her mental state, because it just seems to be in decline, and there's no one around her who is there to give her any affection or to look after her. I mean, we see her pass her husband and brother in the hallway, and he almost seems upset with her for letting this happen in the first place. Like, it seems like he blames her a little bit. Or maybe he's too ashamed and in his own grief to talk to her, but he doesn't even say a word to her. So, I mean, I definitely can't imagine her on the back of a dragon in battle.
Right. I'm really curious because, to your point, where this is a show about such powerful women, and there's a lot of women behind the camera that are guiding our story here. It's not the greatest depiction of this kind of noble Targaryen queen. And I was curious if they're going to kind of shift gears with it. But I love that moment of the two of them on the stairs. I read it a little bit more as the kind of ladder, as his internal shame. He is this child and he's kind of weak. He's never been a good husband to her. He has just become king, a thing that he never wanted. And this is the first major event of his rule. And it's a catastrophe. It's a disaster. And I just love the nod that she gives after they pass each other. She just gives this nod. It felt to me like acknowledgement, recognition on the part of Helena of like, yes, I am alone. He is useless. He will not actually be present for me for any of this. And it is just me here by myself that has to unpack all of this.
Yes. And she's just such a sad character.
Oh.
And the way that Rhaenyra is just like, do you really think I would do this to Helaena of all people? The most innocent person in our family? I don't even have the words to explain the emotions that I feel when I see Helaena on the screen. I just want to cry for her every single time I see her.
Another one, Fia Saban, that I'm just so impressed with what she's doing, because it's a really important role, but she doesn't have the most kind of real estate in terms of screen time. And it's not the most glorious, it's a tough position to be in, but she's able to emote so much silently that I'm really just enchanted with everything that she's doing on screen. I'm so invested in her. And that's part of what I was kind of talking about before, where there's the element that it's kind of confusing to track all the moving pieces if you're not deeply invested in this story and familiar with the text. But there's the other element that these are not people that are easy to root for, LT. There are so few kind of sympathetic characters. And in Game of Thrones, in this world of like terrible villains and kinslayers and all of us, there were a lot of the Arya Starks and the Jon Snows that we could have total sympathy for. And I think that in that way, the green kids, it's tough to root for them. Aegon is not a very kind man. We saw him do some really terrible stuff in season 1. Aemon killed his cousin because they hurt his feelings when he was a little kid. Helaena is the one of this kind of trifecta of children that we just have such empathy for, because again, she is just being used as a pawn in this greater game because of nothing more than her gender, right? Because she is a woman, she's being kind of presented as this piece, and it's really tragic in that way. I think the Team Black kids, it's so much easier to have sympathy for them because none of them are sadists or murderers yet. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's just their parents.
Exactly. I mean, it still kind of gets me, let's talk about Team Black a little bit. Rhaenyra finds out about the fallout. She's in her own kind of small council, and her own council members doubt what she's saying. And she's saying, I would never do this. You think I would do this to Helaena of everybody? And they're questioning, because she did come back last episode filled with fire and vengeance and demand Aemon Targaryen's head. And it's a really great scene. This is why Rhaenys Targaryen is my favorite. Man.
I love her so much.
Oh, LT, I'm so sad. She's just number one with a bullet, big gap, everybody else.
I'm really terrified and upset for what's gonna happen to her.
Fingers
because
crossed.
I love her so much. I need someone in my life to stand by my side and tell someone to gather themselves. You know what I mean? Like, remember who you're talking to. And then I need someone who is going to realize when I have a traitor in my midst. And the look that she gives Daemon, basically the looks that are exchanged, are the funniest thing about this episode. She gives Daemon this look because he's just sitting there with like this kind of smug half smirk on his face. Rhaenyra looks over to him like, I'm sure he'll have something to say that's important. And then she realizes that he was the one who carried all of this out. And he's just like, what? Matt Smith is the king of playing roles wherein he is prince consort to a very powerful woman, and he just cannot accept it. He does it here. He did it on The Crown.
He is so charming, and he's got that quirky little smile, and you look at him and you can't help but kind of love him, right? But lest we forget, Daemon Targaryen is a sadistic monster who like groomed his niece to be put into this position. This is not a good man. We can root for him sometimes, but he is such a bastard, and I don't mean that in the literal terms. He's just terrible. He's really terrible.
He's getting worse every episode.
He really is. The whole like moment of Rhaenys realizing it first, and it takes Rhaenyra actually looking at him to put the pieces together. And we're gonna shift into the scene. There's a lot of these magnificent kind of one-on-one pairings that we get across the episode, but this one of Rhaenyra and Daemon together, it's tremendous as she's going to say, so finally, this is it. We come to it. Like, can you accept me as your queen and ruler? And Daemon gets into a lot of it. He, not great therapists in Westeros, but he's finally like unpacking all this stuff. The idea that Viserys was always afraid of me. And then he turns it around. Do you think that he picked you for your grace and wisdom? And it's such an indictment of the fact that, again, he corrupted this girl and manipulated her and drove her on this course. And some of the stuff that she's saying to him, like, I took this as a challenge when I was a child, but I'm an adult now and I have challenges enough. I don't need your bullshit, man. Are you on my side? I mean, it's very, will you bend the knee, Jon Snow,
Right.
And I just love the pairing between the two of them. I saw a couple people talking about this felt like a play almost of just watching the two of them in that room. It's tremendous.
I'm perfectly happy to see a play,
Right? Yeah.
Their chemistry is so great.
It's electric.
They have this this thing where they're almost adversarial in the way that they care for each other, and it's just really electric to watch on screen. But Rhaenyra getting down to brass tacks and just saying, I cannot trust you.
Mm-hmm.
My father could not trust you.
Mm-hmm.
That is why you were not named the heir, is because you go off and do these things that no one asks you to do, and then you stand behind them, and it means that you are fundamentally untrustworthy.
Mm-hmm.
And if that is the case, then I could never trust that you're truly on my side of me being a ruler. And of course, whenever Daemon hears too much of the truth, his temper gets the better of him, and he charges at Rhaenyra. And it's just horrible to see him escalate every time they have a disagreement. You wonder how many times this has happened before.
Mm-hmm. It's very much when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Like, Daemon's a one-track guy. He's very much going to kind of respond consistently. We have seen it. Violence is his love language. I don't know. He's a very broken, dysfunctional person. And as he's railing and ranting, my brother's throne, there's so many great exchanges. My throne, your brother is dead. This is supposed to be my throne, right? And the little bit that she just gives him at the end, you're pathetic, and he's gonna wheel out of the room. It's really beautiful as he's then gonna pass Baela, and Baela comes in and has this moment with Rhaenyra. Rhaenyra ultimately look, we need to use you as a scout. Baela is a dragon rider. Moon Dancer is small, much smaller than a lot of the others. She's young, obviously. She's still only supposed to be basically 15 in the books. It feels like they're a little bit aged up from there, but they are kids. The ages get tough because Rhaenyra, she's given birth to 6 children at this point and is a good deal older, right? And she just looks so good in the episodes, right? She does not look like a woman who is unpacking everything that has happened in the last week, but I'll take it anyway. She really is.
She's one of those people. She's like Fleabag. She looks wonderful when there's grief about.
Yeah,
she can't help it.
Too true. Emma Darcy just bringing it. Really an exceptional episode for them, I would say. Very. But so the whole moment of then Baela talking to Rhaenyra, and that kind of sets us up for the scene later with Jace, which is one of my favorites of the episode. It's really small, but it's such a kind of beautiful thing talking about fathers, She's like, I think I hate my father, Daemon Targaryen, lest we forget. And Jace it's complicated like that. It's so good, LT. The magnificent setup to talk about Laenor and Harwin Strong. And I don't want to take credit for this idea. It's not an original thought of my own, but I heard somebody else talking about how in the world of Westeros, it is so beautiful that these kids had 2 loving father figures in Laenor Valerian and Harwin Strong. And he talked about Laenor taught us to fish and to sing, and he loved Cape, and Breakbones was gentle and he was fierce. And gosh, I don't know. I think he loved us, but it was really, I loved these 2 together.
I do too. It's a really good scene to kind of clue us into just how different the temperament is in terms of the kids on either side. Also the importance of the relationship between Jace and Baela, and just to to get more screen time for these young actors that I'm sure are going to have much bigger roles to play later this season and hopefully in future seasons.
Oh, heck yeah. They did such a good job moving through the ensemble, you know. Screeners are out for the first 4 episodes. A lot of people have said a lot about them, and I know that I expect that this first half of the season is more kind of focused in Team Green, but I think they're doing such a good job building up the ensemble.
They
A
are.
critique that we have, I don't know if you read that article that came out about a month ago about mid-TV. Did you catch that?
Mm-mm.
It was really just an indictment of kind of how much weak writing there is going into these big budget TV shows kind of all over the place. And again, just to kind of restate the point, there's such confidence in these showrunners and in these writers to slow things down and let us just exist with these characters as they move through their lives. Like this scene with Jason Bela, it's important, but it's not hugely important. It's not driving the plot forward in a big way. It's just important to root us in these people and understand who they are and to be able to empathize with a little bit with them as they move forward through the story. They do it with our girl Rhaenys and Corlys. This is another one of my favorites.
Oh my
the pair of them in
gosh,
bed,
yeah.
like, oh, I love them, LT. Give me this show.
The
I want
most
the
stable
prequel of
couple.
the prequel. Yeah, they really are. But I want the hot D prequel of these two like dating when they were teenagers, man. I love them.
I love them too. And, you know, they've been through so much in their relationship.
Yes.
Like they've lost both of their, I did air quotes there for those listening, both of their kids. And, you know, Corlys just disappeared for vast portions of the time that they were together. But now that they are back together, they really are appreciating each other's company, and they seem like equals, which is something that you never see in relationships in Westeros at all.
Mm-hmm. It's part of the thing where Team Black, like, they've got some real terrible people up at the top of the leadership, but they just have more sympathetic characters across the board.
They do, yeah. Like, they're just way more likable.
Mm-hmm.
You know, yes, Daemon's actions did cause a child to be murdered, but he went against, he just went rogue. You can't really account for a soldier in your army that just does whatever the hell they want to do when they want to do it.
No, it's one of the things that I don't know how well season 1 articulated it. I guess they did early on, you know, but in the book, it's very clear that Daemon, all the stuff with the triarchy and the crab feeder, like he's off making a name for himself. And there is this real division between he and Viserys, right? There's this kind of perpetual question of whether or not there's big conflict between the two of them. But he is a man just pursuing his own agenda. It's back to that whole thing of like the Second Sons and him trying to make a name for himself. Some of the other small folk, we got Adam, we met last week. We met Alan last week. We have Adam now, Valerian, who's going to come find his brother Alan. It's time for the goat stew with carrots. These guys are great. I love these guys.
They are great. I would like to know who their father is.
Yeah, that's a matter of curiosity. They talk about Corlys the sea snake owing them. Right. And so that's interesting. We'll track it going forward. I'm just glad that we're going to set them up, as it were, already. We get the shot later as he's digging clams on the beach. I love digging clams on the beach. It's the only thing I miss about living down on Long Island. Otherwise, I'm happy in the mountains.
I've never done that. That sounds wonderful.
Can be very fun. You wade through like the low tides and the sand dunes, and we would find them with our feet when we were little kids. You just dig your feet into the sand and knock them up. But we get a little bit of a dragon sighting. I think that's sea smoke flying over the air, right?
Yeah. And you wonder why. Why would sea smoke possibly be, you know, the center of attention here as Adam looks up? What could that possibly mean?
Big question, noted. I love his hair. He's got great dreads. A+ dreads. Love those.
Wonderful.
Dreads. Yeah.
Wonderful.
Mysaria. Let's talk about the white worm. This was awesome. I felt like this might be the kind of standout scene of the episode. It's such a magnificent kind of reunion of these two characters, and Rhaenyra does not recognize her at first, and the dawning realization, oh, you realize, you remember who I am. And we get to this point, Mysaria kind of stepping forward, just another absolutely incredible performance. Sonoya Mizuno, I think that for a small character, my God, she like ate this scene up, I felt like. But as she presents herself and this notion that I spent so much of my life trying to be of consequence and realize this is the dream of a child. Daemon, Otto Hightower, no matter what, they'll never accept me as the same. I might as well have just stayed a whore. That she built a house and a home, and then that they would burn it all down because they didn't like the notion that she showed her teeth. She realizes the kind of fruitlessness of trying to find agency in this world of men as a woman and to assert herself in that way. And it's very much kind of reading Rhaenyra for filth in her own way.
Yeah, she is. I've enjoyed Sonoya Mizuno so much throughout her career, first starting off in Ex Machina and then in Devs.
Oh, sure. Ex Machina. Yeah. Okay, sure.
Yeah. And I cannot tell you how thrilled I am that they have toned down this accent in season 2.
Yeah, very good choice. Very good choice. A+.
Because whatever she was doing in season 1, I was like, thank God for subtitles. But yeah, she really does do like, I knew Daemon before you knew Daemon.
Oh yeah, the two of them as like the scorned air quotes lovers of Daemon Targaryen. Like, yeah, he does that. He makes promises and then vanishes. That's yeah.
That sounds right. Yeah. Where have I heard that before? So it's really good to see the dynamic that they have in the scene. And like, you know, they could have very easily played this as like Rhaenyra getting jealous when she realizes that, you know, who this is, but they just kind of have a kinship almost in both having to figure out how to survive this hurricane of a man that is Daemon Targaryen. And it's a really great scene with a lot of like a lot of intrigue between both the characters. I really enjoyed watching this.
I love the way it gets set up. And then the fact that Rhaenyra ultimately will circle back and say, if you say that this is what my husband promised, then I will honor the word of my house. I will set you free. I will send you off across the narrow sea to the west. And then we have the moment of Mysaria like spotting Sir Eric as he's coming up. This is not at all how it's kind of presented in the book, but we never circle back around to her. I don't want to talk about the duel yet, but just to the Mysaria angle. Did Mysaria get on the ship or not? How do we feel we read her part in what happens of this final section here?
I mean, I know for a fact that she reported her seeing the other twin. I don't know if she missed the ship doing that. I'm honestly not sure. I know that it would probably be better to keep her around in terms of needing their own master of whispers. So maybe she didn't get on the ship, because if she goes to Pentos, then she's like well out of all of the action.
Yeah, she's off the grid. I mean, we're not going to Pentos during House of the Dragon, I don't think. I'm really curious whether or not we're going to see her turn up again. You know, I mean, I feel pretty comfortable talking about the stuff that we have moved past in the book already, and not necessarily where we're going. But in that way, the blood and cheese debacle, as it plays out in the book, after they spend 2 weeks kind of torturing blood, he gives up the white worm. He talks about how it is not Daemon that goes to hire them. Daemon is kind of already gone to Harrenhal when all of this goes down. It's a little bit different sequencing of the events that we get in terms of the timeline. So she's much more an active agent in all of this rather than a kind of passive participant, the way that the show depicts it. But I'm very curious to see whether or not she got on the ship. I also felt very confident that she obviously blows up Eric's spot and kind of sets everything up. And I thought that that's a great way to kind of pay back the reciprocal respect that these two women who have had to endure this male world can like see in one another, you know. And I'm really excited if she is going to stay, but I also wouldn't blame them if she doesn't. Let's talk about Otto Targaryen or Otto Hightower a little bit, as Otto is ultimately going to come confront Aegon after the hanging of the rat catchers. This is a thing in the books where Blood gives up cheese. He tells them it's one of the rat catchers. They spend a couple of weeks trying to find cheese. They never really do. They're not sure. And Aegon is just so pissed that in revenge, he hangs all the rat catchers. And then there's a little bit of like a conspiracy theory that in the actual Song of Ice and Fire timeline, Jaime Lannister will find a skeleton in the sewers, and that skeleton was Cheese's body, because as soon as Blood and Cheese got out of the Red Keep, Blood murdered the other guy and took all the money. And that's why they were never able to find this particular rat catcher that they sought. So in the show, it's a little bit different. Aegon's just like, just kill them all. We can't sort through them. I've already beaten Blood to death. Kill everybody. And Otto is going to freak out that this whole political maneuver, the spin that they put on the death of the child, has now been burned up and wasted, as Aegon is going to turn the goodwill of the people. Those rat catchers were husbands and brothers and fathers, and now their family cries at the gate and curses your name. It's such a good setup then, as Aegon's like, while you've been writing letters, Sir Kristen Cole is doing things. And this delivery, LT, like, give him the Emmy now. As Otto just turns around, the slow turn of like, and what has Sir Kristen Cole done? Oh, it sent me. I love it.
Yeah. Very rare for Otto Hightower to be correct in an argument. This show does weird things with your sympathies, right? Like, Otto is the last person, absolutely the last person that you would think that you would feel sorry for or agree with. And then this happens because he's just a consummate politician.
Yes.
And it's really difficult to care for politicians. They're just so smarmy
ruthless
and like ruthless, and they don't have any real morals.
Mm-hmm.
They just adjust to whatever the whim of the people might be, or they think that the whim of the people should be. So for us to be like, seriously, Kristen, this is your god? Like, this is who you think is going to do a better job than me? Okay, sure. Go ahead. Like, I wash my hands of it, essentially.
It's such a disastrous decision, especially because, like, this guy's been king for like 3 days, and the Lord of his Kingsguard, Eric's gonna read him for filth later. Eric, I'm sorry, of like, how come the queen did not have a sword protector? How come the heir did not have a sword protector? Like, where were you? The death of the heir within days of the coronation, and that he's like the leader of the Kingsguard. Now, he is understaffed, right? The Kingsguard, like, a bunch of them did leave and go to Rhaenyra, but it is just like, this guy has not done a terrific job at his job, to your point of him just like failing upwards. You know what I mean? Like,
he's been too busy having sex with Alicent. Like, he can't really focus. he's busy tending the queen, the Dowager Queen.
He's been attending, indeed.
I mean, he didn't lie when he said he was a bed.
No, you were a bed. It's very, very good. It's a tremendous setup. Rhys Ifans, I'm probably pronouncing his name incorrectly. He's just so good. And I think that, like, side by side with Paddy Considine last season, it was easy for Otto to feel so much more subdued. But this is just such an incredible scene as he lets it all out and starts just kind of ranting to Aegon. Do you never think of your father? His grace, what does he say? His forbearance, his judiciousness, his dignity. And Aegon's going to say, fuck dignity. I want revenge, which is like magnificent. But what I love about Otto, I see a lot of people interpreting that as Otto lamenting the days when he had an easy to manipulate puppet king in his hands. And sure, I don't think that that's entirely incorrect, but I do genuinely read affection in what he's saying, and respect and reverence. I think that he loved Viserys. I think that he thought he was a good king, because Viserys was pretty much a good king, except for this matter of succession. He did a decent job, And the reality is that I think that Otto is like a really broken, dysfunctional person that we can both indict for the way that he set his family and the kingdom on this course of destruction, but also sympathize with as he talks about his friend and the loss of the good king Viserys in this moment. Am I giving him too much credit?
It's hard to say, honestly. I do think that if you were to ask the actors whether or not they were being sincere about their feelings when they're delivering the lines, then they would probably say that he would probably say, yes, I do think that he admired Viserys. It's just so odd to hear it coming from him, because he always seemed to underestimate Viserys when he was alive, and did enjoy someone that he could puppet. But I think that now, I kind of honestly think of Otto as the ultimate boomer.
Oh my God. Okay, Otto.
Because he's just like, back in my day, kings thought about keeping the peace. And it's like, okay, Grandpa, let's get you to bed. I just think that he is just, he even says it later to Alicent, the young are all peacocks, all streaking in feathers. That's such a boomer thing to say.
It really is. I know the okay boomer thing has come into popularity in like the last year amidst Gen Z. And I think that like the origin point is very much the great philosopher of the modern age, George Carlin, who does the magnificent bit of like, these people have one philosophy: give me it, it's mine. Give me it, mine. And it's a tremendous George Carlin bit, indicting kind of his own generation in a certain way. And it really is magnificent, because I think that is Otto's philosophy. Give me it, it's mine. Right?
Yeah.
The Hightowers are a very powerful family in Old Town. And Old Town's a place that doesn't have a ton of prominence in Game of Thrones until the late seasons. But we get another awesome kind of revelation. This is the moment. This is straight out of the books, though it's a little bit different. It happens a little bit differently. Kristen doesn't send Eric to do the assassination until after he's named the Hand of the King. But Aegon, like, I'm here to spill blood, not ink. I want war. My new hand is a steel fist, as he's going to strip rank from Otto. The second time this guy's losing this job, lest we forget. Right. And I love,
so funny to me.
It's very funny.
How have you gotten fired by two different kings?
Yeah, it's very funny. And so Kristen Cole is going to be named the new Hand of the King. Obviously, this will not come back to haunt sweet King Aegon. But it's a great setup for the kind of final scene between Otto and Alicent. We'll talk about the duel a little bit too, as he says that thing about the peacocks. But here we go. He's going to name check the as of yet unseen Targaryen, son of Viserys and Alicent, Daeron, who is in Old Town with his dragon Tessarion. I've been indexing a lot on like the dragon count per sides. They really need this guy. They need more dragons, LT. I was so happy that Daeron got mentioned.
Yeah, I was incorrect because I read that he wasn't going to be in the show, but I guess you can't trust, shockingly, you cannot trust everything you read on the internet. So when they mentioned him, I was like, oh, whoa, they're doing it. So that was a really cool moment. Where does Daeron fall in terms of age?
He's the youngest.
He's the youngest.
Yeah, he's the youngest of all of them. In the text of the books, he's 15 years old. And so there's this whole thing where Viserys knew there would be tension between his kids and Alicent's kids and Rhaenyra's kids. So Rhaenyra's kids with Laenor and his kids with Alicent, they're raised together in the Red Keep. And it's a big thing that George Martin does a lot of, like, milk brothers, because noble women of the real world would very often have a wet nurse, a woman who had given her birth to her own child and could breastfeed these babies so that the royalty didn't have to do it, right? I mean, it's just like such an indictment. But the idea was that in the books, Daeron and Jace are of an age that Viserys's kids, Aegon and Helaena, are a little bit older than, like, the bastard strong children. And so Daeron and Jace were milk brothers in George Martin's words, and they were raised, like, on the same wet nurse together in an effort to make them friends. So he's the youngest of Alicent's children.
So I was just wondering how big the dragon would be.
Not that big. Right. So we'll see how they play it here. How do you feel about the TV show doing this? Is this going to work? Is this too late in the day? Does it matter? Because a lot of the casual viewers can't actually even keep track of the characters we have met.
I mean, I would like to see it. I would like to know what this child is like, considering that he has been in Old Town for such a long time. And maybe was raised by better people.
You would hope, right? It's a little bit like the heir and the spare type stuff, right? He's sent to Old Town because Old Town is where the maesters are, and he's going to get his maester's chain, right? And so the notion that once Viserys has the son Aegon, now he's got a male son that can carry forth the line. Okay, we'll marry him to his sister like we do, which, like, oh my God, the incest is, like, so through the roof. You really start looking at these family trees and it's, like, crazy, you know? Like, I'm pretty dialed in, but when Bela's like, what about my uncle? I had to stop for a minute and be like, wait,
like, who is
which
that
uncle? You know,
right? And when Rhaenyra was talking to Bela, I was like, okay, so she is her cousin, who is also her stepmom. Cool.
Yeah, really great. I love the setup. There's a little thing at the end, a stinger, where Otto is saying he's going to go to Old Town to get Daeron. Daeron's going to be more accommodating to instruction. But Alicent changes his plans, and she says, no, go to Highgarden. The Tyrells, who we know quite well from Game of Thrones, they're losing control of their bannermen. This is a big thing in the book because all of these lords have sworn fealty in different directions. We saw it in season 1. Rhaenyra took her kind of tour of the countryside when she was named heir, and all of these knights swore their fealty to her. So a bunch of the Tyrell bannermen, the Reach is kind of southwest of King's Landing. This is kind of the breadbasket of the kingdom. It is in the southern lands. It grows a lot of food. It is a very wealthy part of the kingdom. And while the Tyrells are kind of in charge of it, the bannermen of the Tyrells, a bunch of them are sworn to Rhaenyra. So there's infighting on all of, like, the individual kingdoms. Like, the war is beginning to spread, this tension. So I get excited to see what we're going to do with that. But let's circle it back to our boy Kristen Cole, as we have the little bit of back and forth with he and Alicent. Alicent grabs him early. Who did you tell? And he's like, nobody. What do you take me for? And she calls him out. Like, I take you for a man who wants to, like, do penance, who wants to, like, renunciation here. And it's going to lead to him going to Sir Eric, getting very mad that the dry cleaning has not been dealt with appropriately, and sending him on this assassination mission, LT.
It's just like, Kristen, are you joking? Our cloak is a symbol of our purity and fidelity. Calm down. Calm all the way down. Like, let the man eat. He's been out patrolling all night, and then he'll change the cloak. Of course, he's gonna pick an argument with someone because he knows he can. He knows that his brother to him is a traitor. And so he's gonna throw that in his face as well. But Eric is just like, where were you? Like, what? What were you doing when all of this went down?
I really love it. I love that these parts are actually played by two twin brothers, Luke and Elliot Dinser, which, like, you would need for that final fight. But I thought these guys were great. You know, they're very, tertiary characters in the books, but their duel is written about from these two separate perspectives, where they talk about, the singers say that they fought for an hour and that it was very much that, one draws the sword. They just run into each other in the hallway. And Sir Eric, who is Rhaenyra's man, like says, "I love you, brother," and draws his sword. And then they fight for an hour and they die weeping in each other's arms. And then the other recounting we get is from Mushroom the Fool. And Mushroom is like, no, it was like a real brutal affair. Like Eric cut off Eric's arm, and then Eric stabbed him in the stomach, and Eric lay for 4 days dying from a gut wound, cursing his traitorous brother. I thought it was awesome. They did such a good job with this battle and getting us in the perspective of like, we pretty much know which one is which until it hits the fan. And Rhaenyra is in such a wonderfully vulnerable position, which is a rarity. I really love the kind of duel. It's a small action set piece to close the episode, but I thought it was just a magnificently intimate and personal set piece to like, punctuate a very intimate episode that we got.
Most confusing fight scene I've ever watched in my entire life.
Right?
Twins? Twins are so weird to me.
Right?
I just, it's just so creepy and like Children of the Corn. I don't understand it. So whenever there are twins on my screen, I'm just like, but this fight scene was really brutal, and you could see the similarities in their fighting styles as well. Mm-hmm. And that the fact that they were like reading each other, but also a bit of a brief moment of comedy when the guy runs in to protect Rhaenyra and he's like, which one is Eric?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I would love to help, but I cannot tell them apart. And I know that Eric was the one that had the giant thigh wound. That was the only reason that I was able to figure out what was going on in this fight.
There's a point where it very intentionally confuses us, and then we kind of reset with the two of them in the corner,
right? And
you're able to kind of regroup which one's Eric there. But in the recounting in the book, in the Bard's Tale, which is the one that is favored by the histories ultimately, because Mushrooms is so much more brutal, that they fought for an hour and it woke up everybody in the castle, and everybody came to watch the fight and nobody could do anything because they just had no idea who was who, right?
Yeah.
And it's such an awesome moment. It's really funny because there is another pair of twins active on the show in the Master of Coin, who was supposed to give the baby the pony ride at our small council last meeting. He has a twin brother.
Oh, right.
That's Tywin and Tyland Lannister. And so his twin brother is like back in Lannisport running the city while his brother is the Master of Coin. There's a couple of twins that George is like really having fun with in these.
Yeah.
Films,
there are some twins like the Lannister twins where you're like, you don't need two of them.
Yeah. No.
What are we doing here?
We definitely do not. Less of them, please. Less. Really a magnificent episode, I thought. I really think it's the best episode of House of the Dragon so far. As much as I enjoyed season 1, I came away from it a little bit. Look, I'm a book nerd, and I'm almost always going to say, like, the book was better. And so they just made a couple of choices in season 1 that I felt like, God, I wish you would have taken more time here. But now that we've moved through the kind of preamble of the story and we are in the Dance with the Dragons proper, I'm very excited for where we're going to go. And I think season 2 is poised to be just an incredible season of television.
Yeah, I could not be more excited and anxiously awaiting the next episode.
Oh, God, it's going to be rough.
Great. Do it to me. I walk into every Sunday just ready to get screwed, just ready to get effed up.
Yep.
And this show never disappoints.
When I went through my divorce, a very close friend of mine who practices Buddhist meditation would say to me, "You're in pain. And what that means is that you're alive. To live is to suffer. It's good. It's good." So I'm very happy with the pain that is delivered to me every Sunday.
I'm definitely alive then. Jeez.
On HBO, right? It really just strikes me because you go back to the book and they're adapting all of 2 pages of material in this episode. If that, there's just such a willingness to set us down with these characters. And I think they've really set us up to get invested with a lot of folks. And I echo the sentiments of everybody who says this reminded me of the early days of Game of Thrones, where we spent a lot of time talking in rooms and building up to those gigantic Titanic set pieces filled with $1 billion of CGI. So knowing where we're going this season, I'm very eager for the next 6 episodes. I think it's going to be a rip roaring time. We're going to laugh, we're going to cry, we're going to suffer, and we will know we are alive, LT. Any final thoughts about episode 2?
Just bring on the next, you know? I wish it was Sunday already.
I do indeed wish it was Sunday already. We will be back in 1 week's time talking about episode 3 once it airs. Until then, where can people find you, LT?
Find me on Twitter at LK Starks. Also, we just finished our coverage of Top Chef over at RHAP. We had special guests, Chef Jim and Owen from Survivor, talking about the finale, the season finale. One of the most fun podcasts that I've done. So please check that out. Then I was also a guest for RHAP over at the Perfect Match podcast. That is a ridiculous show that ended in the worst possible way, and I'm here for it. I'm here for all of the drama. If you like dumb hot people doing stupid things and making awful decisions in a gorgeous setting, then you should be watching Perfect Match.
It sounds like Allison Hightower's favorite TV show.
Probably. R.I.P. Allison. You would have loved Perfect Match.
Dumb, hot people making bad choices in a beautiful setting. That's Allison Hightower's MO right there. I'm at DM Philly all over the places in the internet, at Screen Page Pod, our social medias. The VOD for this podcast is up on YouTube, as well as my coverage of The Acolyte with my Padawan learner, Taylor Ball, breaking that down every week. I'm very excited to have you guesting this week, LT, for a midway stop. And we're going to check in on The Acolyte halfway through, talk about what's going on over there. You and I are getting ready to break down The Bear. Season 3 is going to be dropping in a binge this week. So that'll be out next week. Myths and Legends, our Wheel of Time book club over here at Screen and Page. We have come back with the first part of book 2 of Robert Jordan's epic fantasy series, The Wheel of Time. We are reading the first 7 chapters of The Great Hunt. I got together with Taylor and Prez to break all of that down, and it was a very good time. And Kevin Madeo and I are talking about season 4 of The Boys, and we are not pulling any punches. We got deep into the politics last week and the metaphors as they impact us in our daily lives in the summer of 2024. A pretty perilous time in the political landscape. So if you want to listen to Kevin and I ranting about how good The Boys is and how bad American politics is, then you should listen to that podcast. It was very good. And one of my favorite podcasts that I have ever recorded happened this week as well, as I got together with Taylor Ball on What Did I Miss and talked about Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, the juggernaut box office smash from 1991 starring Kevin Costner. Spoiler alert, it might be my favorite movie of all time. Judge me as you see fit. I love it. Azim Ibn Bashir al-Bakir, I think, is the best character to have been in a movie since movies. That's all I have to say about that. We'll be back in 1 week talking about episode 3. But until then, just remember, Rhaenyra the Cruel did it all.